Is a dogma lesson just not bothering to plan? That's a question for TEFLologists. When I read this book, is it better to skim or scan? That's a question for TEFLologists. Can you be a good teacher if you have a CELTA? Or should you invest in an MA or a Delta? From politics to methodology, we'll discuss them all on TEFLology.
Hello, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to TEFLology, a podcast about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL News.
In this week's TEFL News, actually we're going to look at two related news stories.
Okay.
And first I'm going to ask you, you guys are a little bit younger than me, so I'm hoping you can answer these questions. Do you guys know what fleek means?
Fleek. How do you spell fleek?
F-L-E-E-K.
L-E-K. Foreign language.
Uh-huh.
Education.
Yep.
Curriculum?
Nope, it's not an acronym.
Is it something with the point between the weekend and Friday? Like, it's the end of the fleek.
Nice. No, it's not. I'll ask you another one. Bay.
Spelled
B-A-E.
B-A-E.
I've seen that around.
Yeah. Is it an airline?
Airline. No, it's not.
Okay.
No, don't know.
Okay. Well, ICYMI, in case you missed it.
Right, okay.
That's what ICYMI.
In case you missed it.
In case you missed it.
Okay.
Yeah. This article is about, it's about basically fleek and bay are new slang words that young people are using, I guess younger than you.
Yes.
That is possible.
And as you'd expect, a lot of new slang words rise to prominence on the internet.
Yeah.
So there was I don't know if it's a study. I think it's just some professor who's trying to get his name in the newspaper.
Okay.
So I'm not going to mention his name. But it was a study into social media. And the finding was that the English language is evolving at a faster rate now than it ever has before. Yeah, I have no idea how they discovered this. I don't quite believe it to be true, necessarily.
Yeah. Involving in what sense? Involving one way in a linear direction or like spreading out like the branches of a tree?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, what they focus on here is basically new slang words, and that maybe the rise and fall or the creation of the coinage of new slang words is happening at a faster rate, is what this article seems to focus on.
Yeah.
So fleek and bay are two of them. Fleek means basically it's one of those words just means very, very good.
Okay.
Something is fleek.
Fleek.
Yeah.
Is this British slang? This is just...
No, these both started in America.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's why we don't know about them. It's not because we're old.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of young British kids who know these.
Yeah.
And so it's either fleek or something is on fleek, which means it's very good.
Okay.
And bay is like a term of affection for somebody, for a boyfriend or a girlfriend.
Right. I have heard that.
You have?
Like
Yes.
babe.
Yeah.
It's easier to
the
say.
etymology seems like it's a shortened form of babe. There's a folk etymology of it, which is that BAE stands for before anyone else.
Is that like a backronym?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. It's somebody much after the term was first coined. Somebody said, "Oh, this is what bay means."
Yeah.
But it's
Right.
not. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Okay. Other ones are FOMO. Do you know FOMO?
FOMO. Is it the opposite of a mofo?
Huh? I don't think how that would work, but no. This is an acronym, FOMO.
Like YOLO.
Yeah.
You only live once.
But FOMO is fear of missing out.
Okay.
Which I guess is like YOLO.
Yeah.
But the kind of sad version of it. ICYMI, which I've seen around the internet, and I had no idea what it meant.
Yeah.
What was it again?
In case you missed it.
Right, I did.
It seems like a meaningless thing you just threw at the beginning of it.
Yeah. I mean, do these things count as slang words? I mean, like, there's one that I always see on the internet, which is SMH, and and that means shaking my head. So it's when people are like exasperated.
Right.
They've got SMH.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't be able to pronounce that as a word. I mean, does the fact that you can pronounce these as words make them more words than just being, acronyms?
You mean does that count as slang?
Yeah, like
social media
because
acronyms.
it wouldn't be a slang word,
Yeah.
but it's just as common as these, or probably more common.
Okay.
As
What about lol?
lol? Well, you can say it as a word.
Right,
YOLO, mofo, lol.
Yeah, but summer.
SMA.
Yeah,
Right. But what about ROFL?
Ruffler.
Ruffle.
Ruffle, yeah. Ruffle. Yeah. Okay, I mean, it depends.
Yeah. So another thing they found from this study is that those text messaging abbreviations, GR8 for great, and those kind of things. That's kind of those their time is over now, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no more any limitations.
No
I guess for Twitter maybe people still might use those kind of things, but. And then the big one, of course, is emojis. That's the huge rise of emojis.
And that's actually a word in the British dictionary now. Originally from Japan.
Right,
it's actually in the dictionary.
And emojis have kind of replaced emoticons, I guess.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
I think there is a difference.
Emoticons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what the difference is.
Stickers.
Stickers.
Right.
Stamps, yeah.
And then, for example, the Apple Watch. I think probably most messages would be you use emojis to communicate because you can't type stuff out.
Right.
My prediction is
Yes.
I don't think that's going to catch on.
Which one?
The Apple Watch.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it just seems a bit fiddly, and you can only use one finger for it, and it just I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like when they have those watches where you can play The Legend of Zelda.
Right.
That seemed like a good idea, but
you don't wear watches anyway. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I'm unqualified to comment.
Yeah,
I mean, all the reviews of it that I saw were that it's unnecessary and your phone is in your pocket.
Yeah.
But I love it. Like all the reviewers say, like I don't need it, but I really don't want to give it up. Like it's really nice to have.
Well, yeah, I'm a Luddite.
Could be. Yeah, but I mean, I think it does point to a new form of communication, and it's already happening just with smartphones and other kinds of things, where a lot of communication is happening through emojis. Emojis. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe in relating this to language teaching, if language is evolving faster, if slang words rise and fall faster than they have in the past, do you think it's necessary for language teachers to know about these things and teach them to their students? Obviously, it depends on the teaching context.
I think it very much depends on the words, like how long they've been around. I mean, I'm suspicious about this idea because I think that if you say there are more words showing up on the internet, that doesn't really surprise me. Because if you're having a conversation with friends, you make up words, right? The difference is if it's on the internet, there's a record of it, whereas if you say it, it's ephemeral, it's just gone as soon as you've said it.
Yeah.
So you could make up a word and use it for like a couple of days together and then it would be gone. Whereas if you do it on the internet, then it's there and it'll be counted as a new word. Like, I was doing some research about Japanese English and I found this word junker on a blog, which means a person who eats a lot of junk food. And I've shown that to a load of different people. No one else has ever heard of it. But
Japanese people.
Yeah, Japanese people. But on the outside, I thought, that must be a new slang word that had come in because it's there, it's on the internet, there's a blog post about it. You know?
Yeah.
So I don't think that this necessarily points to what this professor thinks it's pointing to.
Right.
And
Go on.
and
I mean, I was going to say probably our students are students who are not native language speakers. They're probably going to know about these words before we do.
Right.
Even like English slang words, if these words really do spread all over social media. I'm sure there are terms that they know that we don't.
I've taught some of these acronyms in the past. I've showed students text and said, what does this mean? And they're kind of guessing the expressions and they've really enjoyed it. I don't know how much they've taken and used it, but they enjoyed finding out about it. And I think it was quite a gratifying thing to kind of go, oh, wow, this is kind of, this is English as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back, a little plug for our future interview. It might be a good way to learn longer expressions by making lots of acronyms. Like your one.
Right.
I actually can't remember.
The ICYMI.
Yeah, that might be a good way to remember longer expressions in everyday English oral communication.
Right.
Might be a good way to cram
ISWM.
the knowledge. Yeah.
I see what you mean. No, I didn't quite work.
But on the other hand, I mean, isn't there a danger that students would only learn those acronyms and not learn the actual phrase? Because I mean, we've all had that friend who will actually say "lol" in a proper conversation face to face because they're so normalised.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, if they're communicating with it,
yeah,
then it's not a problem. Maybe.
Well,
You could
it
do.
depends,
I mean,
doesn't
one idea you could get them to write the same thing in like a more written kind of more formal way and then a text way, and then they're using both expressions in different ways.
Right.
That might be a good way to utilise it all, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I maybe I feel that if students are on social media a lot, then it's likely that they'll probably come across these terms, like I said, and maybe that by learning it in context is going to make a lot more sense than us saying, "Oh, here's the latest slang," and it won't be relevant anymore by that time.
They're not going to listen to us anyway because we're not groovy young kids.
It was like David Crystal telling us how to text speak, isn't it? It's not that cool, is it?
I don't think he was telling us how to text speak.
Well, he wrote a book about it, didn't he?
Right. I think he was just cataloging it and saying that it is a legitimate form of communication.
But I can't imagine him communicating in that way.
No, probably not.
But he might do.
Yeah. He might. You never know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I said we were going to have two news episodes, but just the one. That took our time. So that was TEFL news for this week.
TEFL Pioneers.
Okay, so today's TEFL pioneer is Lionel Billows. Are you familiar with Lionel Billows?
Of course not.
No.
Okay, well, not a lot of people actually know about Lionel Billows, actually, hence why I'm going to try and introduce him a bit more today.
Okay.
But Billows himself was described as a man of many parts, a teacher, trainer, author, poet, but above all, an entertainer.
Wow.
Okay.
And he's also been described as a joker and a maverick, and this is perhaps why nobody really knows about him, to be honest.
Lionel Billows a stage name?
It sounds like it is, yeah. But he's a really eccentric kind of looking character. Like, I saw a picture of him, and he... Imagine a fat Einstein.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
And that's what he looks like. Really eccentric, kind of white, crazy hair. Yeah.
How fat?
I don't know. I didn't weigh him. But anyway, he lived from 1909 to 2004. So he had quite a long life. I think 1994 he died out. But he was working up until his 80s.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty good.
Might be wrong there. And as our friend to the podcast, Richard Smith, who will be a future interviewee on our show, comments, Billows was a pioneer of what came to be known as situational language teaching. The mainstream approach which preceded communicative language teaching in the British ELT tradition.
Okay.
And Smith has accredited Billows as one of the founders of British ELT in a recent volume that he edited.
Okay.
So he sees him as having quite a key part in the progression of our profession. Billows taught for the British Council in a number of countries around the world. And he taught, not hundreds of countries, but a lot of countries, including Germany, India, Cyprus, Egypt, Turkey, and Lebanon. And he was relentless. He'd go to one place, and then he'd be moved somewhere else, and then he'd go somewhere else. And he was a kind of a travelling teacher trainer.
Okay.
Much in the same way as a previous pioneer, Harold Palmer, was in Japan. You know, his sole job was he was employed to go to a country and deliver teacher training seminars.
Right.
And as soon as he finished one, he goes somewhere else.
Okay.
And he has lots of stories about being on the road in between countries. A lot of his experiences came from when he was travelling by train or by car or bus. Okay. So I'm going to talk about two things that he's done that are probably most relevant to his life. So practically, Billows is known for his role as education officer for the British Council in South India between 1954 and 1960.
Okay.
Where he conceived and initially directed a campaign for wholesale reteaching of 28,000 primary school teachers.
So reteaching as in training them
in a new method?
Yeah, so at the time it was perceived that things weren't working or going to plan, and the government wanted to introduce English at primary level, which they hadn't been doing before.
Right.
So what they did is they turned to the British Council to have a new way of teaching, essentially.
That's what they're doing in Japan right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going on, but this was kind of, I guess, more rife at the time, in the 50s and 60s. Rifer, yeah, perhaps, yeah. I think I need some of this reteaching. And the project, it's kind of entered the ELT mythology as the Madras snowball. Are you familiar with the Madras snowball?
It sounds like a practical joke.
Right. Is that like a snowball's chance in Madras?
Well, it's kind of odd because the name Madras snowball kind of has problems of its own. Like the whole idea of a snowball in Madras, it kind of has implications for not really meaning much. And that's what a lot of people think.
Well, I think's failing, you mean?
Things failing, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Billows preferred to call it the Madras English language teaching, or MELT.
Right.
And he came up with analogies of a melting pot, that kind of idea.
A melting snowball.
A melting snowball. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially it was a cascade training model. So what they did was they had 5 trainers initially to start, and then those trainers would then have their own school of trainers that they teach.
Yeah.
And then eventually this would trickle down basically through up to 36,000 teachers
Right.
had this kind of method that started with Billows at the top.
Did it become changed as it trickled down at all? Did people add their own little spin here and there?
It'd be interesting to
and then
compare
Yeah.
what he taught with, a number of...
Right, yeah. To be honest, I couldn't
1,000.
find too much information in what was actually on the course, or the campaign that they like to call it itself. But I found some information. Through the campaign, teachers were trained in active and play-orientated situational methods for teaching.
Right.
But however, Prabhu, in his book, Second Language Pedagogy, Prabhu, described this approach as inappropriate and full of failure,
Right.
basically. And Pennycook believed that it was neo-colonial and top
Right,
down.
Yeah.
And
Pennycook thinks everything's
Yeah.
neo-colonial.
I was going to ask, this sounds like the colonial method that was rejected eventually.
yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, this Madras Snowball isn't as well known as the Bangalore project, which is more famous. I think Christopher Brumfitt talked about the problems with that, but
Right.
to an extent, it's still going on today. And in Adrian Holliday's interview, you were talking about some of the problems with this
Yeah.
going into a country and.
Yeah, and telling people what to do and that kind of thing.
So on the course itself, in their initial 3 months, the staff tutors are given in Madras a course involving the main principles of second language teaching.
Right.
This was written in the 60s, this description, so bear that in mind. Elementary phonetics, remedial English,
Right.
both spoken and written, observation of first-year English classes, demonstration lessons, teaching practice, and the learning of a campaign script, and the singing of campaign songs.
Ooh.
So the script was about the campaign? The songs were about the campaign?
I believe so. I mean, because Billows called this whole thing a campaign in itself.
Right.
So
Right.
the trainers were obviously singing songs about the campaign. Not
A little
not
bit
for
of
the students.
propaganda thrown in.
Yeah, not for the students. This was all
right.
for the trainers. How
For the
how
trainers,
to teach.
to really get them on board with the
Yeah,
with this methodology.
yeah, I believe that's what they mean. Yeah,
Mm.
and during the course they made professional kits, which were largely visual aids for demonstration purposes. So they were
Okay.
kind of making their own propaganda, if you like, if that's a word. Yeah.
It is a word.
I just coined.
So basically,
New bit of
Billows.
slang.
Yeah, basically Billows has been kind of unfairly tarnished by this whole idea of neo-colonial top-down.
Why unfairly, do you think?
I don't think it was his true ideas.
Okay.
Essentially,
But he was still part of spreading them.
he was part of it, but he actually left the British Council because they wanted them to do the same in another country. They wanted them to do the same in Iran.
Mm.
And by that time, he was like, I've had enough of this whole kind of way of doing things, passing down knowledge.
Okay.
And yeah.
So he's kind of a bit like Robert Phillipson when we talked about him. He turned on the British Council.
Right. Just going back a little bit, before he actually became an education training officer, at the age of 19 he actually began teaching at a preparatory school in Lancashire. And at the time the headmaster asked him to teach a whole manner of subjects, so he was teaching Latin and geography. And he even said to his students on the first day, I don't know anything about geography.
Right.
And his whole idea was that we should be learning this together, basically. And even back in the 60s he had this whole kind of idea of autonomy.
Do you think he passed that on to his teacher training methods in India?
And do you think they passed it on to their teacher
Well, it
training and they
seems,
passed it on to
it seems that's what they did to an extent. They kind of
I guess in a
became
way,
his
right,
disciples and learned together with him. But obviously, we know some of the implications of that, basically.
Right.
And he asked, in an interview, a radio interview, he asked of teachers, is your model when approaching a class the filling up of a tank? Is it the work of a sculpture modelling? Is it the gardener watering plants? Or is it two living creatures reacting to one another? And basically, he rejected this notion of marking students' work or giving them grades on their language.
Oh, I
basically.
reject that notion as well. It's ages.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, yeah. He felt it discouraged learning, and he said that he wasn't in the game of persuading students to forget, but to help carry wisdom and background further. So he favoured recognition of ability, for example, group critiquing of each other in class.
Like
that
Right.
kind of thing.
Mm.
Just changing the subject slightly, he's perhaps best known, and more widely known for his book.
Okay.
Do you know the book?
No.
Billows on English.
Yeah.
No. It's called The Techniques of Language Teaching, published in 1961. And at the time, this was considered as one of the only go-to books, kind of like a highway code for how to teach the language.
Kind of like this book that I've got in front
Before the likes of
Yeah,
Harmer
just like that one.
Yeah, listeners.
yeah, you can't see. But before the likes of Harmer and Penier kind of came along, and there was a lot more money involved. This was kind of the first kind of foundations, if you like, basically. And Mark Andrews has written a blog about his book.
Okay.
He thinks this is one of the books that more teachers should read, basically.
Right.
And I'll just read a few quotes. So it's not written from the point of view of the linguist, nor of the psychologist. Nothing here is based on theoretical considerations alone. Everything has been tried, and most of it has been evolved in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Some teachers concern themselves a great deal with the arrangement of material which they wish to teach, and this is certainly important, but of limited value. And then he goes on to say, my practice has been to observe success in learning, whether in my own classes or those of others, and try to abstract the cause of the success from complex of what was done.
Okay.
Basically, and yeah, the book is fairly short, but he talks about this idea of language incubation.
Okay.
And this came at a time before cognition studies.
Mm.
The idea of language having a new word or expression needs time to sink into the mind, and it needs to remain maturing for a definite period.
Okay.
Again, this is not based on science at all, but these ideas came in the 60s before any of this really took hold.
Mm.
And he also talks about the idea of lesson planning and not having lessons in isolation, but as a continuation. And that whole idea of a syllabus, a curriculum, rather than language in isolation.
Right.
And Scott Thornbury actually uses him as an example in his Secrets, what's it called? The Secret History of ELT. And he basically says, he shows a quote on his PowerPoint slides, and everybody guesses this is probably in the 80s, but it's not, it's in the 60s, sort of thing. I don't have the quote to hand. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, this is...
It's probably something like, have you seen the new Star Wars movie?
Yeah.
Could come from any decade except the 60s.
Yes.
Or the ones
50s
before that.
or the 40s.
Yeah, so just going back to a quote by Scott Thornbury, he actually comments that Billows proposes a system of concentric circles radiating out from the learner's immediate context to the world as directly experienced, the world as imagined, and the world as indirectly experienced through text.
Mm-hmm.
You
Okay.
understand that?
Kind of, yeah.
So it's this whole idea of again, going back to the snowball analogy, everything is connected. You know, everything trickles down. There's always continuation. And he kind of rejects this idea that it's just him imparting knowledge. It should be a learning process together.
Right.
That kind of
I see.
that kind of point. So perhaps I'll wrap it up there. But yeah, I'm surprised he's not that more well known. And the likes of Richard Smith and Alan Maley are really kind of pushing for more recognition for people like Lionel Billows.
Okay. Interesting.
So yeah, that's today's TEFL Pioneer.
TEFL Cultures.
So today's TEFL culture is quite a well-known method, Suggestopedia. Are you aware of Suggestopedia?
Yep. Kind of.
Kind of? Yeah, I actually think that's quite common. I think everyone kind of knows or thinks they know what Suggestopedia is, but if you ask someone to explain it, they go, Baroque music, lying on a couch, you know.
Just one when you lay down on the floor with your eyes closed and the teacher says stuff to you. And
Well, again, this is another sort of popular conception of what it is. So I'll explain a little bit about it. First, it was created in the 1970s by a Bulgarian psychopath. No, sorry.
Lozanov?
A psychotherapist, not a psychopath, called Georgy Lozanov, who died in 2012, actually, quite recently.
R.I.P.
Yeah, it's
Nice,
a
an acronym.
it's a portmanteau of suggestion and pedagogy. So Suggestopedia, suggestion and pedagogy, and Wikipedia all together in one word.
this came before Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's one of the many methods that became fashionable in the 70s and 80s, making very grand claims about how easy it is to learn a language, how much this method can help you to learn a language. And Lozanov said that memorization in learning by the suggestopedic method seems to be accelerated 25 times over that in learning by conventional methods.
Wow.
Yeah, which is the kind of claim that is difficult to take seriously these days, I think. Yeah. So, Suggestopedia in the classroom. The atmosphere is very important in a Suggestopedia lesson. So, as I said, he was a psychotherapist. He took a lot of principles from therapy. And so, for example, he wanted the learners to be surrounded by music, art. The way the furniture was arranged was very important as well. So it was all about creating a particular atmosphere that was conducive to learning. And he thought that music was particularly important, but there was a reason that he thought that it wasn't something magic. He thought that because it's rhythmic, it would help learners to pace, punctuate, and structure their speech.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was the kind of logic behind that. Does that make sense, do you think?
In a way, yeah. I read a recent article about how the brain perceives the world. And I read about this before, about how this idea that it's not a stream, it's not a flow, but it's kind of more like, almost like a movie, like you're getting little snapshots one after the other.
Right.
And they connected to this maybe to the way the brain works in waves, like they talk about brain waves.
Yeah.
But that you do, when you're tuning into somebody speaking a language, you are tuning into their rhythm.
Right.
And that your brain starts to kind of follow those rhythms.
Yeah, you do have a moment when you're learning another language where it suddenly clicks. And you'll be like, oh, I got that bit. I understood that. And then very quickly things sort of start to fall into place. It stops being white noise and just turns into actual understanding. In the initial iteration of Suggestopedia, there were 3 stages. The first one was deciphering, where the teacher introduces the grammar and the lexis that's going to be taught in the lesson. For the most part, this was bilingual, so you had materials with the English on one side and the student's own language on the other side. So the teacher introduced that and explains the meaning and structure and so on. The second stage was the concert session, which was there were two kinds of concert session, the active and the passive concert session. So in the active session, the teacher reads the text at a normal speed, sometimes intoning some words, and the students kind of read along. In the passive section, the students relax and listen to the teacher reading the text calmly.
Right.
Okay, so this is kind of what you were talking about.
So they close their eyes.
Yes,
Let it all flow in.
Yeah, and this is where you have to play Baroque music in the background.
Does it have to be Baroque?
It does have to be Baroque.
Right,
yeah, it's to do with the rhythm again.
Right.
And then elaboration is the final stage, and there the students finish off what they've been learning with dramas, songs, games, and so on. So it's almost like a PPP in that they get the meaning, and then they practice just listening to the input and getting used to the sound of the language, and then they start producing it through a variety of different activities. Since then, it's developed an extra stage. So now it's introduction, where the teacher teaches the material in a playful manner.
Okay.
So rather than analysing the grammar, analysing the vocabulary, they're a bit more playful. I'm not sure exactly what that would encompass, but
it might go back to that idea that I talked about before about language play, kind of manipulating it and having testing the boundaries of it.
I think it's a bit earlier than that, because at this point the students have no idea what the language means. So I think it's more just the teacher maybe asking questions or doing
entertaining. With the language, right?
Yeah. So there's the introduction, then the concert session, which is the same, then elaboration, which is the same, and then production, which is where the students speak spontaneously and interact with each other. So in the original version, they kind of play games and do dramas and things. And this one has this extra stage where the students actually communicate a bit more. Yeah. So how does that sound as a method to you?
All over the place.
Right.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem... I mean, it seems... It's not as principled as some of the other methods.
Well, in a way, it is...
over-principled.
It's extremely principled, perhaps too principled.
But there's always a target bit of language to start with.
Yeah.
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 I mean, back in the 70s, what would this have been? This was kind of around the time that CRT came in, and they already had situational language teaching before,
Yeah.
and functional language.
Yeah.
So it would be kind of situations, I imagine. And
Well, I don't know really. I think it would actually be more like dialogues and
Right,
texts that they'd be working with, because they have those bilingual texts.
but the content would be some kind of practical.
I don't know that it necessarily would be. I think it would depend very much on the lesson, what you were trying to get across.
I mean, like a lot of those, the so-called designer methodologies in the 70s. I imagine if maybe Lozanov himself, or if you really believe in the method, you could probably have an effective lesson with it.
Yes. Yeah.
And if an individual teacher decides Baroque music, that's part of their classroom. I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, so I was going to say it's kind of seen as the epitome of silly pseudoscientific methods.
Yeah.
But people do still use it, and it was very popular for a time. So
Right.
why was it popular then? Why is it still popular now in some places? It's because it works.
Okay.
In that, people who learn through Suggestopedia learn. They learn the language.
Yeah.
But any approach works.
What proof for that have you got?
Well, just the fact that if you do anything, I mean, the proof is that people go to these lessons and come out and can speak some of the language. Yeah. The question is, does it work any better than doing anything else?
Right.
Presumably, what they're
factors.
being given is enough input, enough scaffolding, enough chances to produce the language.
Yeah.
And like you say, you could change other aspects of the context, but if those things are present, then it's likely that somebody's going to learn how to use the language.
It's kind of like when they do when they invented medicines in the old days. It'd be like you get the entrails of a moose, wrap them around your neck, and eat a bit of tree bark, and your headache goes away, and you don't know which bit of that worked, so you just keep doing all of it. That's how these ritual things develop. So. You were saying that maybe they have this idea that because they think it's going to work, it's more effective.
Yeah, partly that, but partly just I think an individual instructor. Everybody has their own little things they do in the classroom anyway.
Yeah.
And if a teacher, I think it's maybe the key thing is about creating the right kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
If students are comfortable in that atmosphere. Obviously, if a teacher hates Baroque music, says, okay, now I'm going to put on the Baroque music, that it's not going to have the right effect.
I guess the teachers need to know why they're doing it.
Yes.
Essentially,
yeah.
that's an important point for any teaching, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why are you doing what you're doing?
Lozanov was actually very focused on that. So he calls it, this is what he actually called it, he called it a suggestive, desuggestive ritual placebo system. That was what he called it.
Okay.
And he said that teachers have to give the impression that they have complete confidence in the method working.
Of course.
Because otherwise the students won't believe in it, and then it won't work.
Yeah.
So he was kind of aware, I think Lozanov was kind of aware that it was a bit of a placebo, or maybe he became more aware of that later on. But, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. I think that it does work, but I don't think any better than anything else.
Why is it unfashionable now?
Because people have realised that, A, it doesn't work any better than anything else, and B, it just seems very silly compared to something like community language learning or something like that, or these other methods.
Task-based.
Or the silent way. It has so many little elements, like the Baroque music, the lying quietly on the floor, the arrangement of the furniture. It does seem a lot more silly.
It's not that appropriate.
Yeah.
In some contexts.
And also the founder, Georgy Lozanov, he was actually a parapsychologist who spent most of his life trying to detect psychic energy. Which doesn't
Ghostbuster.
It bodes well for this methodology.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's wrong. That would be a genetic fallacy, but it does raise eyebrows, and I think it's the raising of eyebrows that's led to it being considered, the silliest, the most ridiculous method.
Like one question I have about, for example, Suggestopedia in the silent way is that these names of methodologies are still known by many language teachers, and they still appear in books like the one you held up.
Yes,
which is
approach the methods in language teaching listeners. That was.
And so that they're always there as these are some methods. I wonder, I wonder why they still appear in that book, for example.
Yeah. Well, I think in the latest edition, the entries on Suggestopedia and the silent way have been reduced. Actually,
okay,
I believe I haven't read it yet, but I believe that's
things
true.
are moving on. Things are getting forgotten about.
I mean, when they write these books, I think they try to be as encyclopedic as possible, and they focus on things that are easy to explain to a layperson or a beginning teacher, which these things are, methods are. They're designed to be, because they're meant to be understood by people, by learners. So I guess that's why they still remain popular.
My other question is, what's the difference between Suggestopedia and TESOL?
They're actually the same thing.
Right, that's what I thought.
Yeah, Suggestopedia is a more modern term for Suggestopedia, but they are the same thing apparently. Yeah. So to finish off, do you think there are any parts of Suggestopedia that you would like to use in the classroom?
I mean, I like the idea of quiet reflection. Like, I think that has a time and a place, certainly. Take stock. But, yeah, I'm not sure about the music. And also, I think if you're teaching pronunciation or intonation or stress patterns, maybe Baroque music might help with that.
Yeah, the Baroque, like choosing Baroque music for the rhythms or whatever, that strikes me as he probably liked Baroque music.
Right.
And maybe it's culturally dependent as well.
Could it just not just be just a beat or
a metronome?
A metronome, That makes
I think
sense.
they have used metronomes in language teaching before.
I mean, again, I'd like to experience it. I don't know if I'm the kind of teacher. It would be hard for me to convince students of my enthusiasm for it.
Right.
I don't think just for that reason. I think
I think I'd feel kind of the same as you guys. I think there's more to it perhaps than people often think. There's it's a little more complex. There's a little more thought that went into it than people seem to think there is. But I wouldn't like to use it myself, and I don't think it's probably the best way to teach.
One more question. Where was this mostly used? Like, how widespread was this?
It was used a lot in Russia and Eastern Europe, but there were certain schools of it, and there still are actually. It's still very popular in Russia, the Ukraine, Eastern Europe. There are still schools doing it. And it became quite popular in the rest of the world as well for a short time. But it didn't last very long. It's hung on where it originally started, basically. Yeah. So that's today's TEFL Culture, Suggestopedia.
Okay, thank you very much for listening to today's podcast.
If you'd like to get in contact with us, please send an email to teflology@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter @teflology. If you have any questions or any comments or any suggestions, then please do feel free to get in touch with us, because we're looking for new things to talk about. So, thank you for listening. It's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.